Satoru Gojo, the modern sorcerer who carries the title of the strongest with the broken ability known as Infinity. Since his sprout in popularity, many people have talked about which characters can bypass Infinity and who could be Gojo. And after discussing Ben 10 scaling and really only just scratching the surface of this, I wanted to talk about specific aliens that could not only bypass Infinity, but also beat the strongest sorcerer in hand-to-hand combat. With me today, I have the jujutsu GOAT, that being Jaded.
What's up, everybody? This is definitely not a pre-recorded message, and I hope y'all enjoy the video.
And he's going to be helping me break down Infinity in the simplest way possible. That way we can see what aliens can bypass Infinity. I think it's pretty obvious to say Alien X, Way Big, Atomix, or any of the planetary plus characters, or the ones that are fighting extra dimensional beings, rewriting reality itself. It's a no-brainer to say that these guys definitely can just one-shot Gojo. But if you wanted to hear me say it, then yes, Alien X can delete Gojo's ability along with his very existence. Way Big can destroy the planet they're on and survive, and Atomix's radiation from his attacks would take him out. Don't think that's really controversial, but hey, if someone in the comments is going to say that Gojo is outer, then there you go. So now, with that being said, I'm going to be passing the mic to Jaded, that way he can help me break down Gojo and where he is at.
So one fun fact is that this is actually my second time recording this portion of the video, and the reason behind that is because me and Ty basically sat there and roleplayed that one of us was recording the first time. So I'm going to be recording this portion of the video by myself because Ty is currently busy probably doing something very illegal, and there's no reason why we shouldn't just get right into it. When talking about just about anybody going up against Gojo, the first thing to consider is obviously Gojo's Infinity. Gojo's Infinity is a barrier that operates all around Gojo, and I know that that's a little bit contentious, but the fanbook flat out says that it's a barrier, and if you want to get super technical, in the anime and even in other depictions in the manga, it seems like this barrier or bubble-like effect that operates all around Gojo. Now, Gojo can stretch and even thin out this barrier to the size of his clothing, and it can be completely dismissible to the naked eye. It's really impossible to tell that Gojo has Infinity on if you can't sense cursed energy or anything like that. Now, the fun part about Infinity is actually what's happening inside of the barrier. Now, Infinity works by using the logic in a mathematical phenomenon through infinite sequences and infinite series. Gege Akutami had to bring on what he called special grade mathematicians to attempt to explain Infinity, and this video is definitely not going to be centered around explaining this really hard concept to grasp, but I'm going to summarize it as best as I can. We see in mathematics that if you divide one number by 0.5 or half, you can keep dividing it an infinitesimal amount of times. Now, what that basically means is that if you take 5 and keep dividing it by half, let's say, you're going to keep getting a number that will eventually be as close to 0 without actually making it to 0. As you keep dividing a number by 0.5, you're never actually going to reach the 0, just like how the people crossing through Infinity will never actually reach Gojo. As you cross through Infinity, the space is going to be divided by half of its size, and just like the variable in math being divided by 0.5 each time, it's never actually going to reach 0 because, like I just said, you're never actually going to reach Gojo. That mathematical principle with infinite sequences and infinite series stays true for pretty much every time that we've ever seen Infinity. Infinity is described as putting an infinite amount of distance between Gojo and everybody else around him, so obviously if you're infinite speed, you're going to be able to cross through the infinitely dividing space. Now that's Infinity summarized in its simplest form, and it doesn't really answer how exactly this is possible, and there's many videos on YouTube, and one in specific that you guys should check out, which actually breaks down Infinity using calculus. So if you're interested in the more technical aspects, I'm sure Ty will link it down below, but if you're just focused on the very basis and why this is relevant against all the aliens that Ben has, you've already got your answer. You know, not to shamelessly plug or anything, but if we were to stick around and talk about everything that could bypass Infinity, we would be here all day, and Infinity definitely isn't impervious, especially to things outside of JJK. In the verse, we see stuff like domain amplification, which can completely neutralize Infinity depending on the output. There's also other arguments for raw output itself and force being able to overpower Infinity, but we're not going to get into that right now. The main things that we're going to be looking for that can bypass Infinity are obviously things like existence erasure, or maybe even things that are smaller than atoms like pure photonic based attacks, and not just attacks that are light speed. There's a pretty big common misconception with that. Now, Gojo's 6 eyes have been stated to work on the atomic level. Now, that doesn't mean that they only work on the atomic level, but it does mean that at bare minimum, we know that Gojo can see and observe things and even manipulate space on the atomic level. We don't know if Gojo can manipulate space beyond that, so that's the safest place to make our assertion that Gojo can and probably does manipulate things on this level, and we don't really know if he could go beyond this. Now, that immediately brings up attacks that are potentially composed of things that are smaller than atoms like photons into question question for potentially bypassing infinity. Now, attacks that are pure light and completely made out of photons, which would be smaller than atoms, should be able to bypass infinity. Now, that remains consistent with light obviously making it past infinity because we can see Gojo, and that would mean that attacks that are purely made out of light should be able to bypass infinity. But here we get into the very big misconception with that. There's a common misconception that because light can make it through infinity, therefore light speed characters should also be able to just run right through it, when that's completely untrue. Photons can make it past infinity because of their size, and it has nothing to do with them being light speed. So that would mean that just because any of Ben's aliens or monsters or whatever that are light speed, that doesn't instantly grant them access to Gojo's infinity. Gojo's infinity also has a completely passive and automatic targeting system. This targeting system works by Gojo automatically assigning a threat level based on mass, speed, shape, and cursed energy, and depending on the threat level, Gojo will either allow passage through his infinity or he will just completely shield himself off from the rest of the world. There's also a big misconception where a lot of people believe that you can blitz Gojo's infinity before it actually turns on if it's based on Gojo's mental reactions, and the reason why that's just completely nonsensical is that Gojo makes it a point to Shoko that he's gonna have RCT running on his brain 24/7 to reduce the strain from constantly having on infinity, and if infinity only turned on for these very few moments throughout the battle where Gojo would have to stop things, then it wouldn't really make much sense to account for that strain. Gojo also talks about how he can have infinity on 24/7, and that would only really happen if infinity was always on and only turned off depending on the situation and the threat level of the object coming at him. That means that from the very second that you come in contact with Satoru Gojo in this versus battle, infinity is already going to be on. It's going to come down to other Hax abilities that can actually make it past the infinity, or it's going to need to be something like domain amplification, which can just neutralize the technique altogether. Now, when it comes to scaling Gojo's speed, I think I'm pretty grounded compared to most people, and I'm definitely not a believer in any of the light speed stuff, and we'll start with that, and I'll explain exactly why I don't believe these JJK characters are anywhere near light speed. The only real JJK argument for any character even seemingly being light speed would be using Kashimo's EM waves, and I'll cut to the chase. The EM waves are not a light speed attack, although they're light speed in a vacuum, and according to the refractive index, which is what we use for measuring things like EM waves, because the atmosphere is also pretty empty just like a vacuum, there's not even a 1% difference between the speed inside of a vacuum and the speed in the atmosphere, because again, they're both basically just empty. So let's just be a little bit generous and say that even though it's not technically light speed, it's a light speed attack, because this argument really doesn't matter either way. To prove that this nerfed version of Sukuna actually reacted to a light speed attack, we would need to prove a few things, and we've already got one of them being that this attack is actually light speed. Now, the next thing that we would need to prove is that Sukuna reacted to the attack after it was fired, and he didn't use something like aim dodging or any type of precognition. If Sukuna had used something like the basic form of precognition that every sorcerer has for predicting their opponent's attacks, or even felt out the spark of cursed energy before it was fired, it's possible that the only thing that he outsped was Kashimo's activation time and not necessarily the blast itself traveling towards his face. Now, because Sukuna should obviously be more than capable of using any of these forms of precognition or even aim dodging Kashimo's attack outright, it's impossible to really conclude that Sukuna dodged the blast outright instead of just using one of those forms of precognition to give himself an unfair advantage, and basically means that we wouldn't be able to scale the attack. So while the EM waves themselves are light speed, nobody outright dodges them, so nobody in the verse actually has a light speed feat based off one of these attacks. And the next tier of speed to go over, which would obviously be a tier below, would be something like lightning timing feats that we see throughout JJK. The only real lightning timing feat, in my opinion, would be something like Toji in the anime dodging Nue's lightning, which we don't end up seeing outright, but just judging by the fact that Toji's clothes aren't burnt, then it's pretty obvious that Toji did end up dodging the lightning and didn't just take it outright like somebody like Maki in the Culling games. Maki was able to block an incoming Nue lightning strike from a Nue that was also amped by a 15-finger Sukuna, but Maki also has her own form of precognition that allows her to know when attacks are incoming based on the air temperature and density, which lightning would obviously be a pretty big tell as to when something like that is about to strike. There's also Hikari getting his shoulder tagged by lightning and potentially moving his head a bit before the lightning strike, and this feat is overall just pretty hard to scale. We don't know exactly where the lightning's aiming, Hikari couldn't even dodge it anyways because the lightning attack is a sure hit, and it's overall just pretty messy when it comes to scaling. So if you want to go with the safest approach, then when you take characters like Gojo and Sukuna, who would obviously be massively above Maki, who's already reacting to Naoya, it should put them also comfortably above that Mach 3 level of power. But if you do think that Gojo and Sukuna are also lightning timers because Maki is a lightning timer and they're so far above Maki regardless of the precognition, then you can consider them lightning timers as well, but that's completely up to you. When it comes to AP scaling, it's pretty much the same story. We have our high balls and low balls, but the highest you can really get them is something like Dagon being island level or Jogo's domain making him mountain level, but more consistently and the safest approach for something like that would be to say that Gojo and Sukuna both have their city level feats, so they're definitely at least city level, and something like island or mountain level is a bit contentious because of domain scaling, which in general is a bit weird, but when we're talking about Ben 10, it doesn't really make a difference at the highest level, so you're free to believe what you want because either way, it's pretty much the same story. The only thing I'm really concerned with is explaining why Gojo's Hollow Purple doesn't just erase you from existence and it's not some hacks ability. We literally see time and time again that when Hollow Purple interacts with its opponents, it doesn't just erase them on contact. The only time that it ever really does seem like that are in early season 1 visuals and obviously against Toji. Yurame is flat out hit with the 200% Hollow Purple and they aren't just erased from existence. Sukuna is also hit with the Unlimited Purple and he obviously doesn't just get deleted outright from existence, and we know Sukuna didn't activate domain amplification here because Maharaga's wheel changes color whenever Sukuna does that, and we get a frame by frame shot of the wheel literally being destroyed as the Unlimited Purple is actually going on in chapter 235, and you can clearly see that Maharaga's wheel is staying the same color and it's not changing. So yeah, overall, I've already explained Infinity, I've already gone over his speed scaling, I've already gone over a bit of his AP scaling, but it doesn't really necessarily matter, and we can finally get to talking about Ben 10.
With Gojo's barrier being passive, this would mean even despite aliens that are faster than him or can shoot lasers, they just simply would never be able to cross this infinite distance. So aliens like Accelerate, Fast Track, Eye Guy, Chromostone, they wouldn't be able to blitz Infinity or cross that infinite distance. However, there is one alien that's an exception to this, and he can not only shoot lasers but also travel at infinite speeds, that being Jetray. Jetray is able to travel across the universe within seconds when he's going at full speed, and as I've explained in further detail in my Ben 10 vs Big 3 video, the Ben 10 universe bare minimum has to be infinite in size. So if Ben turns into Jetray and, tries to do his initial shooting lasers or try to tackle him, Gojo would not be affected. Gojo would just do what he did with Jogo, to which Ben would respond by going max speed, and once Jetray enters this state, he would unironically be able to cross this infinite distance, allowing him to hit Gojo in a similar fashion to A-Train from the boys. But besides Jetray, I don't think any speed alien is going past Infinity, so sorry my Accelerate stands, I know, I'm upset too. Now, Sound, if it's strong enough, should be able to pierce Gojo's Infinity. I only say if it's strong enough because Gojo could reinforce his ears with cursed energy, thus making the attack ineffective if it isn't all that powerful. This is what Gojo did when Jogo tried using the mosquitoes. However, Ben doesn't need to worry about that as he has both Wolfblitzer and Echo Echo. Echo Echo with 2 other clones had so much power behind their sonic screams that they can suppress a nuclear fission grenade. Which, I'm not going to lie, if this grenade hits anyone in JJK, including Gojo, they'd probably just get atomized. And the reason why Echo Echo didn't get vaporized was because he was strong enough to suppress it with his sonic screams. So Ben would just go into Echo Echo, try to jump him with his clones, see that this isn't working, shoot one sonic scream, and Gojo just explodes. This is not even me exaggerating. Echo Echo's sonic screams should definitely be stronger than Gojo's cursed energy reinforcement. So pretty much Ben 10 is pulling a jump Kaizen on the strongest JJK character. Pretty disrespectful if you ask me. Now, Wolfblitzer, unlike Echo Echo, doesn't have clones, but his sonic screams are stated to be stronger than Echo Echo's, so he should just be strong enough to put Gojo down. And these two, unlike Jetray, may not be speed aliens, but they should at least upscale from characters like Base Kevin, who is moving over the speed of light. You know that contentious Sukuna feat with Kashimo? Kevin confidently pretty much just does the same thing without aim dodging. Since Infinity, like what Jaded was mentioning, is technically a barrier on Gojo that's automatic, it's possible for some of Ben's aliens to phase through Infinity and hit Gojo like that. This is where aliens like Ghostfreak and Big Chill come into play, who both can phase through people and objects. Ghostfreak is able to not only affect people when he's phasing through them, but he's able to even possess the user's soul. And when this happens, Ghostfreak has complete control over you and your soul, which Gojo would honestly have no real counter to. And if we want to mention Ghostfreak's stats, I mean, this man was boxing with Vilgax, and this is the same DNA that Ben just copies anyway. Now, it's iffy to say if his Fear Hax would be all that effective, because in all honesty, I think it's Fear Hax on a very small scale. But I think if this doesn't work, then Ghostfreak could just become Gojo, thus winning the fight. Big Chill, as he phases through enemies, can freeze whoever tries to interact with his body like this. meaning Big Chill can just simply fly through Gojo and he gets turned into an ice cube. And there are arguments for him maybe freezing the entire null void, which is infinite in size. I don't want to put this argument in the video to confidently say Big Chill would just solo Gojo like this, because in my other videos I mentioned that we don't get to see the entire void, just the area that Ben's specifically in. But if he literally just turned this infinite size dimension into Christmas time, then Big Chill, unironically with a full powered Frost Breath, would reach infinity and just freeze Gojo. And for anybody mentioning, oh, well, Gojo might be physically stronger than Big Chill. Yeah, this man at full power is able to bare minimum suppress energy strong enough to wipe out countries. And I already am Toji / Maki precogging some of y'all in the comments, well, special grades are actually country level said by Kenjaku. Your mother. As far as aliens that might be Gojo, but I'm not too sure about, are Gravattack, Whampire, Toepick, Brainstorm, and Gray Matter. Gravattack is iffy because it seems like his gravity powers lift whatever he wants, meaning it might be able to lift Gojo despite the infinite barrier, because if the attack just spawns on Gojo, there's really nothing for him to do. But it's weird because sometimes he touches people before hitting them with gravity attacks, but then sometimes he doesn't, so I guess it's up to you to decide. Whampire could mind control or maybe life drain Gojo, but I believe he would need physical contact for this, and Gojo himself hasn't shown any mind hacks resistance, so this could give Whampire the win. And this is kind of the same reason I mentioned Toepick, because Gojo should have basic Fear Hax resistance, as people like Sukuna, who's on this level, instill fear into other opponents, but I don't think he's ever interacted with something so ugly that people just get horrified by it. So if you think Toepick can do it, then hey, he just scares Gojo. And the reason why I mentioned Brainstorm and Gray Matter is because of the fact that they are so intelligent that they might be able to figure out a way to get past infinity. My main problem with this though is, for at least Gray Matter, Gojo is just not gonna allow this to happen. He'll probably kill him before he figures it out. But with Brainstorm, it's a little more interesting because he does have higher tier scaling compared to Gray Matter. In my opinion, I feel like it would come down to Gray Matter figuring out how it works and kind of understanding the ability, but he would not have any way to counter it unless he had some like prep time, or if Gojo was in a Ben 10 episode and Ben retreated, then maybe Brainstorm could come up with something. But if they are in a one-on-one scenario and Brainstorm tries to run away to figure out how to beat him, one hollow purple to the head and that should do it. Now, to me, I feel like these are the aliens with the best chances to beating someone like Gojo and getting past something like infinity. If I didn't mention your favorite alien like Forearms, Diamond Head, well, it's because they just simply have no means of getting past infinity, but that doesn't mean they're weaker than Gojo. If you want to hear me say Diamond Head is like planetary so he can beat Gojo, then sure, but again, infinity. But let me know down below what other aliens you believe have the best chance in taking on Gojo that I didn't mention. And thank Jaded for not only coming on and yapping about infinity, because I wasn't going to do it. Be sure to go and check out his channel, linked in the description. He makes amazing videos, and if you guys want us to collab on another topic, comment down below what you would like to see from us next.